Hello there ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what I painted this month for June 2016. Of course it's halfway through July, so it is about time, and I seem to be falling further and further behind with these videos, so I think I may need to publicly pledge to get them up within, let's say, 3 days of the start of the next month, just to make sure we don't end up in this kind of ridiculous situation too often. So as you can see, a couple of different things this month, or last month technically. We've got some trolls there for Kings of War, and we've got the first few pieces of the castle that I bought for a very low price, because it's mainly a toy. So we're going to look at that first of all. Here we go, you can see it against the backdrop of a lovely lava battle mat there. So this castle has a lot more pieces than this, and when this picture was taken I'd done even less of it. I've actually done 2 more towers since then, but there are a lot of walls still to do, because my airbrush is not the most reliable at priming. Primer seems to jam it up really quickly. But as I said, this was previously a toy, so its colours weren't the most realistic. And also because it's a toy, it's not the best at holding paint, so you have to be quite careful with it. First of all, I primed it with the airbrush, then I sprayed it in dark grey, and then I went nuts with the old grey dry brushing on it. And on the roof there you can see where I've dry brushed it in blue instead. On the corners, the paint would occasionally come off when doing a big heavy dry brush with a terrain dry brush. So there are a few spots on the corners where I've gone over it with that flock / static grass at the end there, just to cover up those little spots. But most of it is grey, and most of it started off grey in the first place, so the occasional tiny little bit poking through isn't going to make a huge difference. Certain parts of it were easier to paint than others. There were a few pieces of the castle that were actually red rather than grey, and they seemed to be made of a different kind of plastic, so I couldn't actually use plastic glue on those. I had to super glue those down, and they were even worse at holding paint. I imagine if you gave them a sand down first, that would be a big help. So that would be my recommendation to anyone who's painting one of these. It is quite smooth with it being a child's toy. After the grey dry brushing, I then went round doing all the very edges with white, just to make it stand out a little bit more, add a bit more depth to it, and then I applied the kind of flock, staticky, grassy kind of substance. It's not quite flock, it's not quite static grass, I'm not sure what it is, but it doesn't look very good on bases, but it looks really good as moss. So I'll have to get the rest of that done at some point when my airbrush actually allows me to prime more of the castle pieces reliably. Next up, some more trolls for Kings of War. This is my second unit of them. You may recall seeing the first unit, and because they only come in a limited variety of poses, you do get some arm options that you can mix around a little bit, but there isn't a huge amount of posability, so for some of the arm joints I just cut off the little sockets and plugs and then reposed them that way. But then of course there are a couple of spots where there's just a bit of a hole left over, which I then filled in with green stuff to reposition the arms. The guy in the front left there, the weapon he's holding into the air is actually supposed to be dangling down by his side, so I had to fill in pretty much his entire armpit region with green stuff and just try and mimic the kind of musculature that is visible on the other troll's arms. That's not really my field of expertise, so hopefully it just doesn't look too obvious that it's been reposed. Going in for a closer look at these two, and you can see that the guy on the right there is actually cutting into his own hand with his weapon, which is a bit of conversion work again, because that's not how it's designed. And you see a close-up of the slice into his hand / wrist there, and the blood trickling down, which is of course done with the Blood for the Blood God paint, and I think it looks pretty damn cool. I did saw into the wrist, and then put the weapon in there, stuck that down, and then I'd taken a bit too much off to get it at the correct angle, so I filled a little bit of it in with green stuff again. And you can see the other side of it there, the blood dripping down. I think it looks pretty cool, and it gives you the impression if he's willing to cut into his own hand, what's he willing to do to the enemy? Or maybe he just did it completely by accident, because trolls aren't the brightest. You can see from the back there, the guy on the right there holding his weapon in the air. In his other hand, where he's got the rock, you can see blood dripping off the back of that into the snow as well. And a close-up of the partially snow-covered skull resting next to that little pillar at the front of their base. One of the many skulls I have lying around in my bits box. It's probably from a really old GW Skeleton Warrior kit. And here's the other 2 trolls. These ones aren't as heavily converted. The one on the left's arm has been repositioned again, but the one on the right is pretty standard, because I already had one with the weapon reposed to go above his head. And since they're on the back rank anyway, most of the time, when I'm running them as a horde, then it's not going to matter too much that there's a bit of pose similarity to some of the other models. Again, gone nuts with the blood on them, because I think it looks pretty damn sweet. And the ones on the back I've built up a bit more on multiple layers of thin cork, so that you'll be able to see them a bit better over the heads of the guys in front, whereas the ones on the front were on minimal layers of cork, or just resting completely flat on the base. And there they are from the back. In case you haven't heard me talk about these before, the skin is actually a really, really bright green, and then I've done 5 layers of Agrax Earthshade over it. And after the 4th layer is when I've gone in and done teeth and those little tiny stitches holding their skin together and so on. So the final layer of Agrax Earthshade goes over them as well, because I didn't want them to be as darkened as the skin was. And then the orange was done after all the layers of Agrax, because it's bound to leak onto there a little bit. So not a crazy amount to talk about for last month, but this month I've probably already painted more stuff than this already. We're only halfway through the month. I've done quite a lot of terrain and miniatures as well, so you can look forward to seeing that. Hopefully not halfway through August, hopefully very, very early in August. I've got a few things that are just about finished on the painting table right here. Plenty of other things which, if you've been following in various Facebook groups, you may have actually seen completed pictures of already. But obviously on this video series then I go into more detail on how I actually painted them. And since I'm such an A-list professional painter, of course, then people will be itching to find out exactly how I did it, so they can mimic my techniques. I have actually used bits of this fortress in some games already, and it looks pretty sweet. I haven't used the trolls yet in a big game of Kings of War, but I've got one coming up this weekend, so I think I'll put them in there. Maybe use 2 troll units for the first time, see how that goes. They are one of the few hard-hitting goblin units in Kings of War that doesn't rely on a random number of attacks, which I always roll terribly for. So it'll be nice to have a little bit more reliability. Anyway, that's it for this month. I'll see you again with the next batch of painted stuff in a few weeks. Ta-ta for now.